Hey, what's up, everyone? My name is Dr. Shaniqua Jones, better known as the Olivia Pope of Education. But what I love more right now in this season is that I am God's hoodie girl, and so I'll hashtag that. I'm also the founder and CEO of Purple Path. And recently, I have to tell you, I have to share, which I always do, not my entire life, but there's quite a bit of my life that I share online, and I'm public about it, and I'm transparent. My transparency has been an avenue to bring other people to the forefront in terms of what they are experiencing and normalize whatever it is that they're experiencing and get the help that they need because we all about being solution oriented around here. So, Purple Path, real quick, is the path to restoration. You know, I talk a lot about restorative justice, restorative practices, and all things lead to being restorative and this whole redemptive process. And that's a whole nother conversation. But the reason why we're here today is to really help others the way that this has blessed me because I recently lost my mom. And when I say lost, I mean like the physical touch of my mom because she's still here with me. She transitioned September 2nd, 2022, and then my husband, right after that, had a massive heart attack September 28th. And with being brain dead, and mind you, this is quite a bit. I have my moments, and I'm okay with having my moments, and I've learned how to live even outside of what society say is something that should have taken me out. So I share with you 6 types of grief, and we have to also understand too that grief is not just this one idea that you lose the physical touch of someone that you love, but grief can mean the loss of anything. And so what I share with you right now is 6 types of grief. So on this very first slide, I share with you 6 types of grief and the definition of grief. Grief is a natural emotion experienced in response to the loss or absence of a loved one or something that was once meaningful. There are many different types of grief, including anticipatory grief, chronic grief, traumatic grief, complicated grief, disenfranchised grief, and bereavement. And right now I'm going to pause for a second because if you know anything about me, I was born and raised in the Church of God in Christ. Shout out to Freedom Temple Church of God in Christ, South Side of Chicago, Northern Illinois jurisdiction. And I'm sharing this piece because there are times there were times when I was younger, whether I was listening to the radio or watching Channel 38. If you know anything about Channel 38 here in Illinois, that was the gospel channel. All things gospel, all things religion, all things spirituality, all things God. Or whether I was going to church those 6 days out of the week, when they had their prayer list, there was always this line at the very end of the prayer list that they were praying for the bereavement family. Unbeknownst to me, I assumed that the bereavement family was the last name of that particular family. And I'm like, the bereavement family is everywhere. Fast forward, here we are today. I mean, it didn't take me until today to figure this out, but the bereavement family was a family that was experiencing a loss. And usually it was a physical loss of a loved one, and they needed prayer. So let's get back to it. Each of these types of grief is characterized by its own unique set of emotions, thoughts, and behaviors. It is important to recognize that these types of grief are normal reactions to loss and can help individuals to cope with the difficult emotions that accompany grieving. So let's jump into it. The very first one is anticipatory grief. Anticipatory grief is a type of grief experienced in anticipation of an impending loss. It is a normal reaction to a situation involving impending death or a situation in which an individual is struggling with the current loss. Anticipatory grief can manifest in a variety of ways, such as feelings of anxiety, sadness, fear, and anger. It is important to be aware of the signs and symptoms of anticipatory grief so that individuals can manage their emotions and prepare for the loss. Breathe. The second one is chronic grief. This is known as complicated grief, sometimes called persistent complex bereavement disorder. Ooh-wee. In complicated grief, painful emotions are so long lasting and severe that you have trouble recovering from the loss and resuming your own life. And this, for some odd reason, it may not even be odd, reminds me of PTSD. The trauma that someone experiences in the past is still haunting them to a certain degree to this moment, to the point where they're not living, they're in survival mode. And then the third one is traumatic grief. Traumatic grief is a type of grief that occurs in response to a traumatic event. I just mentioned PTSD as well. And then there's also PTSD, which is persistent traumatic stress environments, whole nother discussion, such as death, a natural disaster, or a life-changing experience. It is characterized by intense and overwhelming feelings of sadness and loss, guilt, and anger that can last for months or even years. Traumatic grief can also be marked by a lack of motivation, difficulty focusing, and difficulty in daily functioning. It is important to seek professional help if you are struggling with traumatic grief, as it can be very difficult to manage on your own. The fourth type of grief, complicated grief, which was somewhat mentioned when we talked about chronic grief. Complicated grief is an intense, prolonged form of bereavement that can occur after the loss of a loved one. It is characterized by excessive and persistent feelings of sadness, difficulty accepting the loss, intense yearning and preoccupation with the deceased person, and difficulty engaging in activities that were previously enjoyable. Symptoms of complicated grief can also include avoidance of reminders of the deceased, difficulty trusting others, detachment from others, and a lack of sense of meaning or purpose in life. If left untreated, complicated grief can lead to depression and other mental health issues. Let's pause for a second, and I want you to know help is on the way. If you need help, please, please, please find a safe and brave space in a person or organization, preferably a professional, that can assist you and help you go from surviving to living to thriving. The fifth form of grief, disenfranchised grief. Disenfranchised grief is a term used to describe grief that is not recognized or understood by society. This type of grief can occur when a person has suffered a loss that is not socially accepted or validated. Let's keep in mind, validation is for Parker only. The only person that's validating us around here is God. But needless to say, back to the subject. Such as the death of a pet. Oh, Lord, what would I do without my Rosie Rose Jones? The end of a significant relationship or the loss of a job. This is the type of loss that we don't talk about that is considered a form of grief. Disenfranchised grief can be further complicated by a lack of social support, leaving the individual feeling isolated and without an outlet to express their pain. It is important to recognize that all forms of grief are valid, and there are many resources available to help individuals who are struggling with disenfranchised grief. Last but not least, bereavement. Bereavement is the state of loss and grief following the death of a loved one. It is a natural process of mourning and can include a wide range of emotions such as sadness, anger, confusion, and guilt. Bereavement can be a long and difficult process, but with the help of family and friends, it is possible to find peace. And what I want to add to this too is that with God, all things are possible. And so I understand that we're talking about family and friends, but I promise you, this is coming from a place of compassion and empathy. I have God, and God is what's keeping me. And so I just hope and pray that this was helpful for you. Be sure to save this post so you can come back to it later. Follow us on Instagram at Purple Path by Dr. J. But more importantly, get the help that you need so that you can heal. And not just heal right now in this moment, but sustainable healing so that you can continue to stay on this healing journey, so that you can sustain, so that you can go from surviving to living and from living to thriving. God is. My name is Dr. Shaniqua.